You're unmuted.
Okay. Now everybody is muted, except for I. Thank you for showing up. Nice to see everyone today. I'm thinking maybe there are some new people. Just curious, maybe raise either a physical hand or a virtual hand if you want to identify as someone who has not been here before. Look at that. Lovely. Welcome. All right. That's wonderful. Somehow word has escaped. People have been let's see. This is April 4th, 2023. I have taken to identifying the day, the beginning of the recording, for anyone in the future who might be looking at this, which means we've been having these classes for 3 years now, and we are coming to the end of the second book that we have gone through in those 3 years. We're on the last page, unless we spend a day on the acknowledgments, which seems a bit, I don't know, stretching a point. But we have been, besides meditating, then I'm often reading something from one of my books, which, I wonder if that's, sort of, maybe I should be reading from someone else's books. Maybe one day I will, but for now it's my books. We're at the end of the book called A Burning Desire, Dharma God and the Path of Recovery. But before we get to that, we are going to spend 20 minutes in meditation. And generally, I give instruction for about 10 minutes of that time, and then leave it silent so people can just work with their own practice. So I see people preparing themselves to meditate. I actually got to meditate in a room with other people the other day, which was quite a shock. But we're back to online here today. So we're all still just doing the same thing, whether we're physically together or not. So settling into your posture and establishing a balanced, stable sitting position, bringing the body into stillness, and trying to hold the body with ease, but in a very still position so that the stillness of the mind can support the stillness of the body, a partnership between mind and body. And the eyes can be closed or just lower your gaze. And beginning by just feeling the general state of your body. What are you feeling like right now? It's not really a question that needs a verbal answer, but rather just tuning in. What sensations are present? Is there a feeling of calm or anxiety, of alertness or drowsiness? Interest or boredom? Just, again, tuning in. What's here right now for you? starting to feel the breath moving in the body. And you can sense the breath at the nostrils, the touch of air coming in and out. You can follow the breath at the belly, rising and falling. Just letting the attention settle on one area of sensation. It's natural for the mind to wander when we try to focus on the breath or on any object of attention. So our practice is to gently come back. We return over and over, each time reconnecting with the body, the energetic state, each time releasing any tension, stress, using the breath for its calming and healing qualities. If there's a persistent thought that returns repeatedly, first just to notice what theme is being evoked, and then noticing what feelings are connected to that theme. We often walk around with repeating thoughts, worries or plans, regrets, concerns. Just thinking the same thing over and over, trying to solve some problem with our minds. And this practice encourages us to let that go, at least for a time, to step out of the realm of solving, planning, doing, and move into the realm of being, just being present, of feeling, of knowing. All right. For some reason my light over here seems to be flickering, and it's a bit distracting. Wow, I hope that was more pleasant for you than it was for me. I have started obsessing about the neighbor's dog, and so I spent that sitting when I wasn't talking, composing an email. Oh, always fun as well, always entertaining to feel that energy, unpleasant energy, such as it is. So if you thought I was enlightened, I mean, I don't know, do enlightened people get bothered by the neighbor's dog? We'll have to ask one of them to find out.
Just throw him a big cattle knuckle bone over the fence, keep Olive busy.
Yeah, sometimes they do that. But my neighbor's a therapist, so she, when she's seeing her clients, she puts the dog out on the porch so that to solve her problem, she gives me a problem. Bless it all. Okay, I am going to read from A Burning Desire, the last section, the last real, content of the book, which is on page 215, and it's called Continuing the Path of Recovery. I think that there's a few interesting ideas in here. I think people in 12-step programs sometimes debate whether they should say they are recovered or recovering. Have they healed from their addiction now that they aren't actively drinking or using? Or some aspect of their addiction, or is there some aspect of their addiction that lives on in them? In the big book, the alcoholic book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the authors say they are recovered. And at the time that book was written, the most sobriety any of them had was 4 or 5 years. So why should someone like me, who has decades of sobriety, not make the same claim? In terms of my addiction to alcohol and marijuana, I can certainly say that I have recovered. The main reason people say recovering is the understanding that even though you aren't active in your addiction, were you to pick up a drink or a drug today, you could easily fall right back into those old habits. You have to continue to maintain your recovery. That's a claim. I'm not sure that's the main reason, but that's what I said here. My commentary on my previous writing. This is true for most of us. I don't know what light, the different lights are like flickering. Is there something going on in Berkeley with the power? I think I must be irritable this morning. Everything is annoying me, except you guys. You're not annoying me yet. Just don't get me going. All right, sorry. We may have to delete this recording. Seriously, though, what is up? Okay, so get on track here, dude. Got a job to do. Okay. However, for me, there is a more profound aspect of not claiming to have completed the process of recovery, and that relates to the teaching of the First Noble Truth, the truth of suffering. No matter how long it's been since I last drank or used, I am still susceptible to suffering. For me, there's an aspect of woundedness in being human. The great writer Flannery O'Connor, when asked if someone had to have had special difficulties in life in order to be a good writer, said, quote, anyone who has survived his childhood has enough information about life to last him the rest of his life. Flannery O'Connor was using, even as a woman, was using sexist language, but there you are. Anyone who has survived their childhood has enough information about life to last them the rest of their days. Unquote. That's from Mystery and Manners, a great book if you're a writer. You're interested in writing, Flannery O'Connor. So back to Kevin's words. Growing up is hard. The Buddha listed a litany of pains: birth, aging, sickness, death, not getting what you want, having what you don't want. A cynic would say life is one insult after another, but that's an exaggeration. Life also has compliments. The thing is, everything is impermanent, and we are regularly going to face pain and difficulties. So I think of recovery not as getting over some addiction or illness, but as learning to live with the truth of suffering. Buddhism and the 12 steps are two of the best tools I've found to do that. Okay. Whether addicts or not, we are subject to greed, hatred, and delusion. If we don't watch out, we'll get hooked by them. And in fact, even when we do watch out, we can get hooked. The Buddhist practices help us to see what's happening. The 12-step practices help us to stay honest about what we see. It's a nice little balance there. Having the humility to see ourselves as imperfect is a great help. Once we think we've arrived at perfection, we stop growing. Having a community to rely on, to share with, and to guide us is another vital help. The lone seeker is a lovely, heroic image, but for most of us, it's a dangerous way to live. Having a teacher, a mentor, or a sponsor is vital. Being a teacher, a mentor, or a sponsor is also vital. Being able to accept help shows humility. Being able to give help shows generosity. In his commentary on step 11 in the 12 and 12, Bill Wilson says, quote, meditation is something which can always be further developed. It has no boundaries, either of width or height, unquote. Where does the path end? Does it end? I think that once we experience the joy and richness of a sober, spiritually motivated life, there's no need to answer those questions. We are grateful for that lack of boundaries, for the limitless possibilities of depth and breadth on the path. Certainly the challenges don't grow any easier, as the inevitability of aging, sickness, and death remind us. If we are, however, aiming to get the most out of life, it is the way of non-acquisition, of not getting anything, that is ultimately most fulfilling. Ever guided by Dharma God, focused on its wisdom and power, we strive not for some accomplishment or resolution, but just to live with as much clarity and kindness as we can in this very moment. The end. Well, it doesn't say the end there. So, one thing I noticed about this little section is that, like many things that I write, it sort of hops from one topic to another. So I thought maybe I would go back and kind of review a little bit, kind of outline what it is that was in these 2 pages. Because I think there's a lot of useful stuff here, if I do say so. First, this question of whether we were recovered or recovering. Ultimately for me, it's just one of those, like, let's have an argument type questions that isn't particularly helpful or important. But I think it's, at the same time, people, I think, who are concerned about seeing themselves as inherently flawed or permanently flawed, then the idea of saying of not being able to say you're recovered is sort of feels like a burden or a negative thing to carry around. It's like, I've left that behind. And I think that's a legitimate attitude to take and to have. That you don't want to sort of see yourself as perpetually caught in some loop of trying to recover. Like, you're still recovering, you haven't recovered. When are you going to recover? But for me, it comes down to really this. It's like an identification thing, like saying, am I an alcoholic, or am I not, am I an addict, or not wanting to say that. And so what I think is most relevant about it is what's useful for you, and first of all, what's useful for you. So what we say in Buddhism, skillful means it's, is it useful for you to think of yourself as recovered, and that helps you, or does it help you more to think of yourself as recovering and in a process? And whatever choice you make there, to watch out for self-deception and trying to, particularly when you want to say you recovered, the risk of that is that you want to deny or kind of cover up things that are still not resolved. So anyway, it's an interesting question. So, but I do like this idea of bringing it back to the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. But this can be sort of, a trap in Buddhism too. It's like, it's like when somebody tells you, oh, well, you're a Buddhist, so you shouldn't be angry, right? Or you shouldn't, why are you suffering? If you're a Buddhist, didn't you let go, sort of thing? And it's like, come on, like, that's just, spiritual bypassing, right? Like that somehow, oh, because you went on a retreat or something, or you try to practice mindfulness, that you shouldn't have any attachments anymore, or you shouldn't get angry anymore, shouldn't have any feelings, I guess. It's like, so I just beware of that kind of trying to skip to the end and then say you're at the end, and then it's like, I'm recovered. Okay, it's all, I'm enlightened. Okay, good. Now I can go shopping, And I do kind of love this Flannery O'Connor line, which was, very impactful for me when I first read it. And, and it points to this larger idea that I return to a lot, which is that everybody suffers, right? That no matter what someone's externals, no matter how they may appear, whether it's wealth or privilege or power or so-called success, that they still have to deal with dukkha. And it's greed, hatred, and delusion that are the problem, that we all have to live with. And you don't have to have any special suffering in your life to experience those things. And, and that isn't to say that there aren't some forms of suffering that are worse than others, because clearly there are, and you're really lucky if you can have a life that doesn't involve horrors, where there's no torture or death of your child or, personal, trauma. But that doesn't mean that just, surviving, how does Flannery kind of saying surviving childhood, it in itself is not difficult and painful. So, I think it's one of the things that I love about the Four Noble Truths and how the Buddha frames our existence. And it's something that I think when I first encountered those teachings, that was very comforting for me to see that the way I had experienced life was not a sign of some inherent failure on my part. That the fact that I had struggled and yeah, I was somebody who lived a very comfortable, privileged life as a child, and really much of my life, but particularly as a child, and then to come out of that with a lot of suffering, with a lot of depression, there was a certain, maybe back in my mind, like guilt or shame about it, that I shouldn't have those feelings, right? It shouldn't be difficult for me. Other people have it much harder. You kind of hear that and you think, well, yeah, that's true. Doesn't mean my difficulty isn't worth, recognizing. Okay. So a couple lines, if I may, as the author, say that I like this line about life is one insult after another, but life also has compliments. I think that's a pretty, if I do say so, but we're not here to praise Kevin. We've come to bury Kevin, not to praise him. Sorry, but also, what's the other line that's good here? Well, this idea I think is very helpful. The Buddhist practices help us to see what's happening. The 12-step practices help us to stay honest about what we see, and that in some ways captures how I think these two, certainly in a significant aspect of how these two paths complement each other. Back to the compliments, because, and this is something that I kind of try to bring out, but a lot of the greater Buddhist world doesn't tend to come to Buddhist recovery classes or meetings, so they maybe don't hear this. But I think there can be this self-deception that happens in meditation or in Buddhist practice, and largely because there's nobody in there to call you on your stuff. You're sitting there, you're meditating, whatever arises, nobody knows. And further, I mean, self-deception is obviously, a human tendency, and it's really one of the key tendencies that recovery it has to deal with, and that we, in order to get into recovery, we have to break out of that. The term denial is a form of self-deception, and until we become honest about ourselves, which is so much imbued in the 12 steps, we're never really recovering, and our spiritual path is always going to be limited. So the 12 steps. Step 1 is about honesty. Step 4, step 5, steps 8, 9, 10. They're all about honesty, right? And then meditation, is something that is also supposed to be about honesty, but as I say, can, without the sort of overt intention of looking at our denial, looking at our self-deception, it can become a little realm of like hiding out. So I like this point. The Buddhist practice help us to see what's happening. 12-step practice help us to stay honest about what we see. Having the humility to see ourselves as imperfect is a great help. Once we think we've arrived at perfection, we stop growing. I mean, and this is, people often say, "Oh, you're so humble." I'm like, I'm just honest. I'm not like trying to prove how, like, whatever. It just, I don't see how somebody can be honest and not humble, frankly. maybe that's just me, but having a community to rely on. So, here I am kind of laying out the path. I mean, going back, the title of this section is Continuing the Path of Recovery. So one of the reasons why it jumps from topic to topic is because I'm trying to sum up in a couple of pages, like, okay, this is what we need to do. So again, the lone seeker is a lovely, heroic image, but for most of us, it's a dangerous way to live. You can pull that line out, put that on an Instagram post, Maybe we should do that. Speaking of which, we were going to do that, Monica. Remember, we were going to we were trying to upgrade Kevin's social media presence. And, I always get about halfway there. And then I'm like, never mind. I'd rather play golf.
Well, Angela and I just talked about it. So I guess at some point when you're ready.
Yeah, let's get together soon. It'd be nice to hang out with you guys anyway. So we'll have a call soon. But yeah, I mean, this is again one of those things that's tied up in the spiritual path, right? Addiction is an isolating condition. We tend to isolate. Buddhist meditation looks like an isolating practice, because the meditation itself is just done internally, and you're done, and you do it. You can do it alone, or even if you're with a group, you can isolate within the group very easily. Buddhist communities can be very impersonal. And it's not always a place where you come and you make friends, you meet people. It can be a place where you just come and meditate together, and somebody rings a bell, and then you go home. So, this is one of the things when people ask me about getting sober or establishing a recovery program. I mean, this is one of the things I land on very heavily. Like, you can't do it alone. And indeed, meditation practice, very few people can sustain a meditation practice over time, or even learn to meditate without guidance. And certainly to sustain it without community is very difficult. It takes a very special kind of determination to do that. Also, then, really, I'm talking about the 12th step here at the end, saying, being of service or getting help, be really vital parts of the path. But the thing that when I just read this morning before we started, the thing that stood out to me, or kind of jumped off the page to me, and maybe it was partly because it may be the last thing, but also because it fits with something that I didn't sort of know at the time I wrote this, was the whole passage of Bill Wilson saying meditation is something which can always be further developed. It has no boundaries, either of width or height. And I wasn't really thinking about the Metta Sutta, which says, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. It has no boundaries, he says. And then, Ajahn Pasanno has a book called, which is a quote from the Buddha, abundant, exalted, immeasurable. So, again, this idea of the limitless possibility of meditation practice. And it's a great, again, maybe it kind of brings us back, if you will, to the, am I recovered or am I recovering? Because when we realize that this practice, that there are limitless possibilities within this practice, then I'd rather have it be ing, the recovering than recovered, because recovered suggests something that's stopped and that's ceased to progress and to develop. And so my meditation practice is recovering. That's not quite right, but it's developing. It's not developed. It's developing. I on the 3-month retreat in 1981, there was a teacher who stirred things up to a great extent, to the extent that I think the Insight Meditation Society changed their rules in the succeeding years because she challenged some things that they didn't really want challenged. But anyway, her name was Sunanda Anik Mayhew. And but she had a line that she would say about, she was French, and so she would say, everything is ing. Everything is ing. And she would say this with a French accent, and it took you a while to figure out what she was saying. Everything is ing. You'd be like, what? It's what? Say what? What are you saying? Everything is what? In French, I think that's all. So it's a great Dharma teaching, right? It's a teaching about impermanence. Everything is ing, everything is changing, everything is moving, everything is recovering, everything is developing. So it's a good one to use as a mantra, right? Everything is ing. And people will be like, what are you talking about? All right. But this idea of meditation is boundless also then points to the experience of the mind being boundless. And so when we talk about emptiness in Buddhism, or when in the what are called the immaterial absorptions, one of them is the realm of infinite space. And so when you're practicing, and Venerable Analayo talks about this in his book, Compassion and Emptiness in Early Buddhist Meditation, it says that when you practice boundless loving kindness or boundless compassion, and many of us and many of you who have been on retreats and done really intensive practice with loving kindness will know what I'm talking about. One can get to a space where the mind feels quite vast, and it's really an inspiring and powerful experience, but one also that brings great insight into the boundlessness and the borderlessness of the mind, of consciousness, and of our interconnection, when we see that we're all these vast beings who are sharing this space. There's a sense that, what I think of as the boundaries of me that separate me from you, that dissolves in this state of boundless loving kindness or boundless compassion. Emptiness, emptiness is not a great term. It's another one of those terms, sunyata. Don't think in our, in English suggests that there's nothing there, but that's not exactly the meaning of emptiness. It has different sort of implications in Buddhism, but one of them is that things are empty of any solid substance. So the idea of self is empty because there is no one thing that is solid, that is immutable, that we can point to. But also, when the mind becomes very spacious, it's like there's a lot of empty space in there. It's just a lot of stuff that just nothing there. And, that there's a lightness to that. a joy in that boundlessness. It's kind of that feeling of being uplifted. It's like levitating. It's like, oh, I'm just like floating in space. So, I guess, that kind of sums up what I wanted to go through in that. It's a pretty nice little section, I have to say. If you do have the book, I think it's always nice to read the acknowledgments in a book, just to say, see who influenced it. Typically, the acknowledgments in your first book are the longest acknowledgments. If you look at the acknowledgments in One Breath at a Time, there's a lot, not so many in this book, but yeah. And this book was published by Hay House, who were sort of an odd pick for me. And but my agent at the time had a good connection with the editor, but they seem to have stopped printing this book, which means that it is out of print, which means that I am trying to get the rights back to it, and if I do, I'm going to retitle it and self-publish it. So I've never been satisfied with the title. So there you go, wrapped up, Burning Desire, done. But we have a few minutes left if anybody has a burning desire to share. There you go. Work that in. Jeff, hi. Nice to have you on a Tuesday morning.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
I so rarely share, as you know.
That's true.
I talk a lot outside of this, but I'm really self-conscious of like raising my hand in a group. But I wonder if you could speak to this idea of like voidness or emptiness, because it came up in my Sunday thing as well, with the sense of like the misconception or definition of like that there is no self kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I gleaned from what you said and what I heard from Will on Sunday is it seems to me, or how I've manifested it in my mind, is that it's more about being free of construct, like things that we think are our identity, or is often constructs of thoughts or societal things.
Yeah.
And to be free of that is like an emptiness or a voidness. Am I onto anything at all?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's very well put. And I'm not the best. This isn't a topic that I feel like I've got a lot of insight into. So somebody like Will might be better. We're talking about Will Kabat-Zinn for those who don't know.
Yeah, it's not a Dharma and recovery thing. Just
right.
I see Marina's comment.
Just Dharma, but somebody like him might be better at elucidating this. But I think that's one of the key things. It's a very good example of what you mean by empty. It's like, oh, what you think has meaning has a defined meaning really doesn't. It's kind of empty of that meaning. Like it's just a thought. It's just and what's a thought? It's just this thing that passes through the mind, and it's temporary. Doesn't have any physical substance for sure. So it's empty of anything physical. But more importantly, it doesn't have any lasting substance. It's not a stable thing. And that's what, so emptiness and impermanence are very much tied together.
Okay, got it.
But if you really want to get into this, I think Guy Armstrong's book, Emptiness, is probably the best one that, and I haven't read the whole book. I've read like just really just the opening of it captures a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, and Buddhadasa has
started-
also written about
I
it.
started Heartwood of the Bodhi and it
Yeah.
just annoyed me.
Yeah.
It's so like, oh my God, if I'm really getting into this, I'm supposed to just be this empty shell. That's my interpretation, which is, of course, based on my construct. All right.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can understand that. And, there are lots of Dharma books that just don't resonate. And, right,
Yeah,
it doesn't mean they aren't valuable or useful for somebody, but a lot of times I think the problem is that when it gets too theoretical, it gets hard to connect like real life experience
yeah, thanks.
with the words on the page.
Totally.
And like, what?
I got really whacked out. I'll just
Yeah.
say that. So
And
thanks. I'm taking up a lot of time. I want
That's okay. I mean, this is a really good question because it reminds me, the Abhidhamma is like the most dense Theravadan Buddhist text. And I went to a talk where Bhikkhu Bodhi was talking about the Abhidhamma. He'd been giving a course on it, and it was like deep into the course. And it was like he was speaking a foreign language. I couldn't understand anything he said. And I went up to a monk that I know afterwards, or a couple of days later, and said, boy, I didn't understand any of that. He said, you have to have experienced it before you understand it, before you can understand the words. And I think that's very true. So very often if I read some Dharma and it clicks, it's because I've been there. And if it doesn't click, a lot of times it's because I haven't been there.
Thanks.
So keep going on retreats,
I will.
you'll get there. I know.
Kevin, I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh yeah, that's cool. That's cool,
Gotta
Monica.
go to the
Thanks.
next thing. Sorry,
Okay.
Steve.
Thanks for
You're-
your service, Monica. Really appreciate it.
Okay, bye everyone.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too.